Morning.
Morning.
So when I was 11 years old, I found out what abortion is. No one told me where we were going. We went to a really pro-life church that prided itself on actually being involved in the rescue movement, when that was all going on. This is in Sacramento, California. And so my dad took me with a group of guys from our church to pray in front of an abortion clinic in downtown Sacramento. Now, no one had told me what abortion is. So I was confused. We're on this little sidewalk. There's like four of us, almost blocking the sidewalk, and it's a little prayer circle thing. And I didn't know what we were praying about. I was bored. I was confused. We were in front of this ugly brick building. It had a feeling that there's something wrong with this, but I didn't know what. And so I asked my parents later about what we were doing, and they told me what abortion was. And I went through a sequence of feeling three different emotions. The first thing I felt was surprise. I was a homeschool kid. I was kind of one of those over-sheltered, conservative homeschool kids. I hadn't even had the talk yet. I had no idea what was going on. So just this idea, this was kind of my cultural bubble getting pierced for the first time. My first real confrontation with sin, because in our church, people had big families. It wasn't Catholic, but there were people with 7, 8, 9, 10 kids. Some women wore head coverings. It was a very conservative church. And so just the idea that someone would not want a baby was just shocking to me. And then I felt really sad. Not angry, but sad. And then this kind of rising sense of, I guess I'm going to have to stop that when I grow up. Like any overzealous homeschool kid. I'm going to be William Wilberforce, And so I started telling people I was going to be a pro-life speaker when I grew up. So I got my calling really young. I knew that this would be what I would be doing from 11. And, after starting Teens for a Life group and after working at a couple different pro-life groups 10 years ago, we start this. So fast forward to about 10 years ago, and I'm in the Denver airport on a layover. It's one of those medium-sized layovers. It's not so quick that I'm having to run to my gate, but it's also not like I've got a lot of time. I grabbed a sandwich, just went to my gate. I've got a half hour or whatever. I'm just going to eat my sandwich at my gate and board my plane and get home. I sat across from a businesswoman in her late 30s who asked me the question that I've spent my entire career hating. What do you do for a living? It's how am I, assuming she's pro-choice, how am I supposed to answer that in a way that's not going to get this started off on the wrong foot? And so I answered her that day in a way that I'd never said before, and it has now become my go-to response. So she said, what do you do for a living? I said, I try to help pro-life people to be less weird. And she smiled a little bit. So it was already working better than anything I tried in the past. So it seems well, what does that mean? And I said, well, I'm trying to help pro-life people to use more good arguments and fewer bad ones. But more importantly, I want to help us to connect relationally with people who are different from us. People who are coming from a different religious place, a different political place. I want to help us to connect. Said another way, I want to help the pro-life movement to live out Colossians 4, 5 through 6, which says, conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Like your speech, always be filled with grace as a seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person, which tells us what? I mean, this is a little bit scary at explaining anything biblical to a room of pastors, but correct me if I'm wrong, but this tells me that we're supposed to respond differently to different people. This tells me that evangelism done well is more complicated than memorizing John 3:16 and some Christianese slogans that we can say at people who are willing to listen to us, it's complicated. Same thing is true for the pro-life movement. I want to help the whole pro-life movement to look more like what it would look like if Jesus talked to a pro-choice person. I am fascinated by the question, what would that look like? What would his body language look like? What would he ask? What would he not ask? And what would it sound like when Jesus said things that are grounded in truth, but spoken with gentleness and grace? Basically, my mission in life is to help as much of the pro-life movement as I can to get closer to that mark. It started because 10 years ago, my brother and I were thinking about writing a book when my brother, who just graduated from Biola, said something that would just kind of stop us dead in our tracks. He said the pro-life movement is not known for its love. It's we know about pregnancy centers. It's we should be known for our love, but we're not to them. They don't get it. That's actually become really obvious since Dobbs. But we're not known. And I said, well, we're not known for our love. We're also not known for being a very thoughtful group of people. So we've got two big problems if we're going to affect culture. We can affect laws, but how are we going to affect culture. So what we try to do at ERI is something kind of weird. It's something that you would expect you would only do one thing, because they're on opposite ends of a spectrum, but we're trying to do two things. One, I like philosophy. I want to help pro-life people to say smarter things. Bad arguments drive me insane. I'm that guy. So I want to help us to be more logical, use fewer fallacies and all that. But I also want to help us to be way more relational in the way that we're having those conversations. How are we connecting? What does it look like to be friends with people who are pro-choice, as opposed to them just being like maybe a debate partner sort of on Facebook or something like that? That's what we want to help people to do. So this morning, after talking a lot with Catherine, what we decided we thought would be the most helpful is some of you want apologetics. The pastor who is actually really involved in kind of the vision for this was looking for apologetics, because you guys are being asked, I think, more questions now than you were before Roe was overturned. And you were already probably getting a lot of questions even before that. And so I want to share with you, there's so much that we could talk about, but I want to share with you the argument that we have found to change the most pro-choice minds. So you get a sense of kind of a novel way of talking about abortion that I think can work well, especially if you've got people in your congregation who are not quite sure what they should think about this. So I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about a few of the biggest landmines that you have in front of you when someone brings up abortion, which is the question of rape, and what do we do if her life is at risk? That conversation is changing a lot right now, and I've got some thoughts. And then I'm going to want to share with you an idea that I had for how pastors and youth pastors can reduce the number of future abortions in your church. And then we're going to have kind of a brainstorm session. Well, I'll merge it with Q&A. Well, I'll be happy to answer questions, but I'm actually going to set us up for me to hear ideas from you as pastors for some thoughts about where the church could go in this post-Roe America. But first we'll get into apologetics. So there's two big disagreements between pro-life and pro-choice people. We don't disagree about whether poverty is a bad thing or whether rape is a bad thing or something like that. But there's two big disagreements, like two pillars. One of them is this idea of fetal personhood. Is the unborn, this living human thing, is this like you and me? Is this a valuable person with rights? Or is this like a potential person? Like if you let it, incubate long enough, then it'll become a person down the road, but it's not now. And so it doesn't have rights, and it's not wrong to have an abortion. So that's one big disagreement. The other disagreement has to do with bodily autonomy. It's this idea that maybe if pro-lifers are right about personhood, we should still have the right to have an abortion, because there would be a government overreach to control what women can do with their bodies, even if it's a person, is kind of the way that argument works. We don't have time to talk about this pillar at all today. I have a lot to say, but if you want some resources from us, we made a landing page. So if you go to equalrightsinstitute.com/bodily rights, equalrightsinstitute.com/bodily rights. There's videos and articles and podcasts and things that can help you. It's one of the most important parts of the abortion debate. I actually think it is more foundational to why pro-choice people are pro-choice than the fetal personhood thing. And pro-lifers get it confused all the time. So it's really important, but again, we've chosen what we're doing with this morning. So we're going to talk about that first pillar. What do we do? How do we try to convince people, without using biblical arguments, that the unborn is a person like you and me? Because I value the Bible, but most of the people that I talk to on college campuses don't. And so there's this thing that we've got to sometimes try to help pro-lifers that we've been training. It can be a little bit frustrating for them because they want to go out and, functionally be like, hi, you're pro-choice? Well, Psalm 139 says that God knit you in your mother's womb, and Jeremiah 1:5 says that God knew you before time began. In the New Testament, you've got second trimester John the Baptist kicking in his mother's womb in the presence of first trimester Jesus. And the atheist is like, I don't believe in your book. I don't care. I think it was written by guys 2,000 years ago who heard voices in their head. Like, it doesn't mean anything to me. It's like a Muslim coming to you and being like, I'm going to prove to you from the Quran that my religion's true. It wouldn't work for you, assuming that you don't already believe in the Quran. So how do we do this from a common ground position of just talking through science and philosophy to show them how reasonable the Christian worldview actually is our approach. Now, I spent like 10 years of my life teaching a certain way to talk about the unborn and why that they are valuable like you and I. And then my friend Steve Wagner heard this really smart Christian philosophy guy named Dr. J.P. Moreland at Biola say some stuff about equality that got him thinking. And then he and my brother started kind of tooling around with how we could turn this into an argument and try it on campuses. And then we started testing on campuses all across the country. And sometimes we try things like, I like, trying to figure out what's working right now. Truth doesn't change, but culture does. So Gen Z processes data psychologically really differently than Gen X does, which means that the arguments that will actually be persuasive to them, that'll not just true, but also persuasive and maybe change their mind, might be different than what worked for Gen X. So we're just trying to figure out what's working right now. I don't care what used to work. I want to know what works right now. And so we started trying this, and sometimes we try things and they don't work out that well. This is the most extreme case of something working really well. In fact, we were stunned. We had never seen so many pro-choice people become pro-life right in front of us. In fact, after our outreaches, we do these debrief sessions where we all sit like in a circle in the grass and we talk through some of the people that, talk through stories, and then ultimately pray for entrust the people that we spoke to God who loves them way more than we do, and that's what we would do. Well, that first part just kind of became repetitive. So, I saw someone become pro-life today. Oh, cool, what happened? I used the equal rights argument. Oh, okay. And someone else. I also saw someone become, what happened? Oh, well, I was using the equal rights argument. Okay. This is the same verse, second verse, same as the first, right? It's like that became almost completely our debrief sessions. So I want to show you how to do it, how to use it. And if nothing else, even if you don't master this, I'll point to a YouTube video where you could refresh yourselves. But if nothing else, to get a sense of a different way to talk about this issue that is working so much better with young people than anything that we've ever tried. Part of that is because we are going to be focusing on equality, which is arguably what Gen Z cares about more than any other thing. And I'm going to ultimately try to force them to make a choice between two things. I keep on bumping these things. I'm going to try to not do that. That's annoying. I'm going to try to force them to choose, are you going to be pro-choice or pro-equality? And young people tend to care more about being pro-equality. They also tend to care more about self-identifying as someone who is a pro-equality person. They care more about that than being pro-choice. So if I can force them to make that choice, they often do, and they choose pro-equality and they become pro-life. So there's 4 steps to this argument. The first thing, weirdly, is to step away from abortion. This is very strategic because we want to talk about equality. So I might say, I'm going to want to get their permission, kind of. I don't want them to feel like I'm dodging a question. So I might say something like, can we put abortion on the shelf for a minute so I can understand how you think about rights more generally? Like, I promise we'll get back to abortion later. I'm not dodging anything. And then ask if they think equality is important. And specifically ask about the right to life, or I prefer the protection from violence. Using the word violence and connecting that to abortion is really, really effective with young people, especially on the left. So here, there's a bunch of different ways you could do this. I don't want, like, God gave you a voice. I'm not trying to make a bunch of Josh Brahm clones. So you could say, do you believe in equal rights for all people? Or do you think equality is important? Or do you think people deserve an equal right to life? And again, my personal favor would be, do you think it's important for people to have equal protection from violence? So choose whichever feels most comfortable to you. And if they say yes, which they probably will, then agree. This is common ground. Don't ever let common ground go by, like Neo in the Matrix, like dodging. No, point it out every single time. They are not expecting to find common ground with pro-lifers, especially now. So every time there's so much that we can agree with them on, point it out. It starts making them think, oh, maybe this actually could go somewhere interesting and we're not just going to be in the exact same place that we started from. So common ground. And then that's going to bring us to step 2, which is to sort who is in and who is out. So you want to kind of introduce this idea of an equal right to life circle. Everything inside of this circle has an equal right to life or equal protection from violence. Everything outside of it doesn't. We're going to talk about what goes in that circle. What should actually, the way that we think about this, humans and animals, what all should go in that circle? We're going to start by talking about the most obvious case, human adults. Like, if I can't convince this person that she and I have an equal right to life, then I'm not going to get very far with the unborn. But luckily, basically everyone in Western civilization, so much for the fact I taped it. I unplugged it. Because I'm a professional. Check. Okay. So I want to know what should go in this. So I'm going to ask him about human adults. And I'll ask him about like several categories. Okay, can we agree that black people should have an equal protection from violence? So I can be like, yeah, okay. Can we agree that LGBTQ people should have an equal, yeah, of course, yes, we agree. What about people with mental or physical disabilities? Can we agree that they have an equal right? Yes, of course, okay, good. You could even throw in humor here. I think it's really good for pro-life people to try to bring humor into their conversations, not with inappropriate abortion jokes, of course, but this is a way to humanize us. And luckily, you don't even have to be that funny. Some people are funnier than others. I think most people think of themselves as funny, but some people are funnier than others. But I had a Christian comedian on our podcast talking about this, and my main takeaway from him, it was so interesting. He said, it doesn't actually matter that much how funny you are. What matters is that they can tell that you're trying to be funny. That's what's doing the heavy lifting. They can tell that you're trying to be, again, personable and charismatic, and like you don't hate them. You're not freaking out that you're talking to a pro-choice atheist. It's just like kind of. So I might ask about like, what about Nickelback? I was like some group, like should they get an equal right to life after all the music that they've made? Or you can talk about a rival sports team, people who wear socks with sandals, whatever. You just kind of like make fun of some group. It just brings a little lightness to the conversation, which can be really helpful. Then I'm going to ask them about human newborns. Are human newborns, should they be in the circle? Do they get an equal protection from violence? And most people agree yes. There's 4 philosophers who disagree. There's a bunch of kids when they take Philosophy 101 and are trying to like question everything that their parents ever taught them. Sometimes they come out foolishly being like, I don't know about newborns. But most people agree that newborns are in, which is helpful common ground. And then I'm going to throw them a curveball. What about squirrels? For real, like seriously, like, should squirrels be in the equal right to life circle? And I'm going to ask them, and most people don't think that they are. Now, of course, we talk to animal rights activists all the time. I can see your faces. You're like, wait on, where's the twist? Of course, we talk to people who think that humans and animals are the same. And I'm willing to have that conversation and try to debate them out of that view. And I'll tell you the most extreme thought experiment, like how far, because I literally ran over a squirrel one time. I didn't try to. I was driving through a Civil War battlefield literally on my way to work in Georgia, and this squirrel darted out, and it did this kamikaze thing in front of my car, and I didn't miss, and my car went ka-chunk, and I looked in the mirror. I can remember this so clearly. So I looked in the mirror, and I'm looking to see if it's dead, wanting it to be dead. I don't want it to look like Scrat in the Ice Age. Like I don't want it to be suffering. And it was really, 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 really dead, and I was happy for that. I didn't pull the car over. I didn't try to give squirrel mouth to mouth. Like I didn't call any authorities. I just went to work. That sounds funny, but if that same thing had happened, except it was a 2-year-old kid, really different. It's not so funny anymore, right? That would be a totally different situation. So when people are like, no, man, I still think that they're equal. Here's how far I'm willing to go. This is a little bit mean of a thought experiment to give to an animal rights activist, but I'm just trying as hard as I can to kind of like push them outside, help them see there's a problem with their view. So I'll tell them about a story that my brother once told me about a roommate that he once had named Jacob. Jacob was a hunter. And Tim told me that one day Jacob went out, he stalked a deer, shot it, he brought it home, they skinned it, and they made sausage out of it. And they ate it for breakfast. Of course, an animal rights activist is like, oh my God. And it's like, I know, it's terrible, right? Oh, what do you think should happen to Jacob? And they're like, oh, he should be in jail. I'm like, yeah, like how long? Like 3 months or something like that. And I'm like, 3 months? You said animals and humans are equal. What if he did that to a girl? I don't think you're all following me. What if Jacob went out into the woods, stalked a girl, shot her, brought her home, skinned her, and made sausage out of her? He should be in a Hannibal Lecter mask talking to Jodie Foster for the rest of his life. What are you talking about? It's like, of course not. Of course humans and squirrels are not exactly the same. And most of us understand that from intuition. Ultimately, if people are completely unwilling to see that, I'm just not going to be able to get much farther with them. I'm not going to get them on zygotes if they think the squirrels are people, probably. So we're going through all of these cases. We've talked about human adults. We've talked about newborns. We've talked about squirrels, which leads us to solve for X. What is the thing that gets you into the circle? What is the thing that gets you access? What is like the key card? What is the property, if you're into philosophy, that we're looking for? And we're looking for a non-degreed property, not a degreed property. In other words, we're looking for something that's like a light switch. It can't be like a dimmer switch. Any dimmer switch option will not tell you how to ground equality by nature. So we're looking for a light, either you have it or you don't kind of a thing. So I might say something like, there must be a reason why some things are in the equal right to life community and some things are out. Let's call that thing that gives you entry X. What do you think that it could be? And of course, one thing we already know, as I explained, is that it's got to be a light switch thing. It can't be like a dimmer switch. So I'm going to listen. And there are a lot of pro-choice answers to this question of what it could be. But as my friend Trent Horn says, these little books you all have in front of you, he says pro-choice definitions of personhood either include too many things like squirrels or they exclude too many things like newborns. So I'm going to try to give them time to work through this puzzle. What do they actually think could be the thing that gets you into the circle? I'll just, for sake of time, tell you about two of the most common ones that come up. But basically, regardless of what they say, in my head I'm thinking, well, would adults be in the circle? Would newborns be in the circle? Would squirrels end up being in the circle accidentally, like when they're not supposed to be? So let's say they say sentience. When a pro-choice person says the word sentience, they probably mean some kind of like a minimal level of consciousness. You're aware of your surroundings, but you're not thinking about them. It's like minimal consciousness. And a lot of people would say like that, it seems like how can it be wrong to kill something that's not even ever been sentient, much less like self-aware or conscious or something like that? So okay, let's work with that. Would human adults still be in the equal right to life circle if sentience is a thing? Yes, good. We're going to do audience participation now, I just decided. Would newborns still be in the circle? Yes? Yes? Good? Okay, so you might be thinking like, well, what if it's in a temporary coma? Okay, so here's the thing. Temporary comas can be really helpful to talk about. Sometimes, especially with philosophers, pro-choice people sometimes just see them as kind of these weird examples. It works sometimes, but it doesn't work all the time. So in general, newborns are in. I have found what's more effective is to talk to them about squirrels, because they have a squirrel problem. Squirrels are sentient. Squirrels are way sentient. In fact, I was recently doing some research on squirrels because I'm fun that way. And I was learning about how eastern gray and eastern fox squirrels will actually store caches of nuts over a 7 square mile area. Like they don't want the predator to get all their food, so they'll spread it out. And then if they get hungry, they'll like dart out, to one of them. They memorize where all the locations are, grab a nut, run back home. That's a super sentient squirrel. So under this view, if sentience is what gets you in, then squirrels are now part of the equal right to life family. Squirrels are now, like they're in the circle, and I don't think that's the world that I live in. I don't think that I committed like a really insane murder in that Civil War battlefield that one time. Now, sometimes they're going to find themselves sort of caught on like a seesaw that they're going to try to get just perfectly balanced because they don't want the unborn to be in. That's kind of, they know that's their starting place. They know they want newborns in. They know they want squirrels out. So it's kind of like, what could they say to right that seesaw? And in the end, it's either going, as Trent says, it's either going to be too far one way or too far another way. They're going to either have a squirrel problem or a newborn problem. So sometimes they'll bring up self-awareness. So this is a more advanced thing. The first kind of self-awareness you get a couple of months after birth. That's where you start figuring out that your body is an object. Like it was where you see like your babies with the hands, they're like, whoa, like that. We've all seen this, right? That's the first, most basic kind of self-awareness. And that happens 2 months after birth. So a self-awareness definition, they're going to have a newborn problem. Because newborns are not self-aware. Really, the kind of self-awareness that philosophers are usually talking about, you don't have until more like 1.5 years after birth. That's where like you understand that you're a unique entity that will exist over a period of time, and it'll be the same thing. Like you don't have that within the first year of life. So now they've got a newborn problem, and they're not going to want that. So they're going to try to figure this out. At some point, they might exclaim, "What do you think it is?" I'm glad you asked. I'm happy to tell you. So we've stepped away from abortion. We've sorted with them who is in and who is out, focusing on adults, newborns, and squirrels. And then we've solved for X. We've helped them test their answers to see if they have a squirrel problem or a newborn problem. And then it's time to share your solution. I would say something like this. I think the only answer that works with what we already know from our sorting process is something like human nature. It's the only thing that everyone in the community shares equally. And to bring abortion back into it, that is why I think embryos should be protected from violence. They have that same thing that the rest of us in the community share. So I think that they must be included. And when I'm doing this on campus, I'll always add this little thing about like, so I'm not pro-life for, notice this is not a religious argument. This is also not an emotional argument. I'm not pro-life for emotional reasons. I don't get the warm fuzzies when I look at a picture of a zygote. I'm sorry, it looks like a fuzzy orange to me. I am not pro-life for emotional reasons. I'm pro-life because it's the most rational conclusion I can come to. Because I'm not starting with the Bible is true as my metaphysical basement. I'm starting even deeper than that. I'm just starting with the most obvious thing I think that I know, that everyone in this room has an equal right to life. That's so obvious. So I'm starting from there, which almost everyone agrees, and I'm reasoning from there. What I'm not doing, this is actually further than I go on campus, but for you guys, what I'm not doing is ad hoc reasoning. This is when you reason backwards. This is like the Google Maps version of reasoning. When I went to get here, going to drive here yesterday from Charlotte, like I plugged in an address, and then it told me the steps I needed to drive to get there. And you make all kinds of mistakes this way. This is where like, well, I want to have a pro-choice position at the end of this, so what do I gotta say? And then mistakes happen. And I'm not doing that. I'm just following the truth where it leads, willing to go wherever that goes. And ultimately, I have not yet heard a good reason to discriminate against this group of humans that are in the womb. And in the long sad history of the human race, we have discriminated against lots of groups of humans that we called non-persons. And every time that we've done that, really, really bad things happened. And I'll say, as my friend Charles Camosi says, do you really think that for the first time in human history, we are carving out a group of humans and we're right? Or maybe, is this yet another case in a long string of them, that one day we will look back with horror? I think that's where we are. It's understandable to me, like it's more understandable to me for people to be pro-choice than like when I think of people who are like pro-slavery. Because like I don't understand that. It's like, how can you not see the humanity in this person's eyes right here? I get the pro-choice thing. This happens behind closed doors. They don't see it. They don't, a lot of people have seen fuzzy ultrasound pictures, but they haven't seen abortion for what it actually is. And so it makes sense to me that there would be more people who would be pro-choice. But this is what we found to help get them out of it. One quick note, because you were going to ask anyway. Human nature. I said something like human nature, and I use those words very intentionally. So we do not mean biological humanness, like having human DNA. That's not what I meant. This is a philosophical term. We don't think it is precisely. This may sound confusing, but we think it's best to keep the answer intentionally vague so we can help them to think about equality without getting into complicated philosophy about persons. So I have a precise philosophical definition in my head. We can get into it in Q&A if you want. The thing that we found in our testing is that it doesn't work with most students because we're basically throwing people who can't swim into the deep end of the ocean. We're taking them to deeper philosophical waters than they can swim in. So when a philosophy professor comes out, I go straight to that stuff. I go straight to the advanced stuff. But for 99% of the people we talk to, it hurts the conversation. It gets them distracted. They think that I'm talking about relativism or something like that. It just like gets off track really, really fast. And so as much as I sometimes like using big words with pro-choice people to make them think that, well, maybe this guy's smart enough to listen to, like that actually doesn't work. I just kind of tell them this thing that is more simplistic. It's pretty close. It kind of implies something that's pretty close to the actual answer. But saying something like human nature is what we have found to be the best of all the options because we don't think that it's actually having human DNA. If you want to learn more about that, we don't get into in Q&A, the Equip for Life course is an online course that we've done on apologetics. All this is in it. We have a whole hour-long advanced philosophy module. If you want to get into the weeds, we're happy to get into the weeds with you. We just don't usually do it in things like this. So, quick review. We just covered a lot of material. So step one is to step away from abortion. You're going to ask the other person if you can talk about something other than abortion and come back to it. And then ask if they think equality is important, specifically the equal right to life. Make sure to acknowledge common ground. Then step two is to sort who is in and who is out. Use the equal right circle to talk through obvious cases of what things do and don't have an equal right to life. Then step 3 is to solve for X. Ask what it is that accounts for why some things are in and some things are out. And be prepared to explain why their answers have problems. Almost every answer will include squirrels or exclude human newborns. And then finally, step 4 would be to share your solution. Tell them that what you believe accounts for the equal right to life, something like our human nature. And so this gives the right answers for adults, babies, and squirrels. And then bring it back to abortion so that this would apply to unborn humans as well as born ones. And the result is that abortion violates the right to life of a member of the equal rights community. Do you see how this would be so much more effective with young people? Like, I've had cases where I had to maybe make the argument 3 times. I wasn't planning on telling you this, but I was talking to a woman in DC several years ago. I'd been training this group called Students for Life. Their staff, and we wanted to do outreach, and we couldn't do it on a college campus because it was summer. And so we went to like downtown DC, not like the touristy area, like where like people live and work. There's like a whole bunch of bus stops. So I had some people in pairs doing like surveys, trying to start conversations. And then we set up a pool table near like a subway station. And so it's just a table, and it just had a sign on it. It's like a poster board just taped together, and asked a question like, should abortion remain legal? And we set up a yes option and a no option and also an it depends option in the middle, just so that they don't feel like I'm trying to label them. They can label themselves however. I don't care. I'm fishing for conversations. It's not a real poll. It's not like statistically relevant at all. Pro-choice always wins. It's a college campus usually, right? And so I'm there at the poll table just kind of rotating out staff members to train them through actual conversations. And this woman came up. She was probably in her mid-30s, maybe early 40s. She was still wearing her McDonald's uniform. She had just come from work. She was walking on her way to get home. And she saw us and stops by to talk to us. And it was tricky a little bit in the beginning of the conversation because I was right behind the table, and right behind me was a wall. And with body language, I like to try to get on people's level. Like, I'm kind of a tall guy. I'm not real tall, but I'm kind of a tall guy. And sometimes tall guys do this thing with short women where they kind of lord their height over them. See how awkward this is right now? Like, I just think like some guys just don't have enough respect for what it's like to go through life as someone who can be picked up and put in a car, or something like that. So so I'm trying to get to like, this is my happy place at an outreach, is this. This looks like I'm relaxed. It's the least weird way to bring my height down, get my eye level at the people. I'm not going to get on my knees. And so that's usually what I want to do, but I was stuck behind this table. I was worried that if I went around the table, it might seem aggressive. I just didn't feel like an opening. So at first, I'm trying this move. We've all seen this move. That worked for like 3 minutes. And so then I basically ended up resting my arms on the sign to make it look like I was relaxed. I looked really relaxed. I wasn't. It was a really flimsy sign. So you put like an ounce of pressure, it's boom, it's like collapsed. So my core was getting this workout for like an hour, but I looked relaxed. And at the end of it, she basically becomes pro-life. I had to use the equal rights argument 3 times before the dots connected, which is what happens sometimes. And by this point, I'm needing to go. like this rest of the staff is all standing over here, like watching this weird thing, and I've got to debrief with them, and then I need to catch an Uber to get to my flight. And so I've got to kind of quickly, as graciously as I can, get out of this conversation. So I said, "This has been so wonderful talking to you. I've loved this, but unfortunately, I have to go. I've got to debrief with these guys I've been training, and then I've got to get to the airport." She's like, "Well, what are you training them to do?" And I was like, "Well, this, pro-life and pro-choice people having good conversations." He's like, "Really?" And then he went over and gave them a spontaneous speech. "You should all talk about abortion. Listen to everything this guy says. He's great. I could have talked to him all day." I love his body language. I could just he made me so relaxed. And here's the thing, and I'm pro-life now, and I'm so glad because I've been pro-choice, but I've not been wanting to have an abortion. I've been so much not wanting to have an abortion, I've been afraid of getting pregnant, so I haven't been having sex with my husband. But now I'm pro-life, so I'm not worried about that. So I'm going to go have sex with my husband. And she left. It was a big day for her. And him. But sometimes you've got it, sometimes it just takes a while for people to connect those dots. That's okay. We want to kind of be in there with them. Okay, let me talk about those 2 landmines. Let's talk about the question of rape. This will come up in literally every conversation about abortion that you ever have. I get really frustrated watching pro-life people answer this question because I think they usually do it pretty badly. They usually end up too far on one end of a spectrum. They'll either be super, super nice and compassionate about the woman and never mention the baby, Or, more likely, they will just talk about the baby. They'll use some line like, well, why should the child pay for his life for what is his father's crime? As if that's why a woman in that situation has an abortion. So that's usually going to be one of those two things. It's like you either seem like you only care about women or you seem like you have fetus tunnel vision and you can only see babies. And I want to say we can do them both. But you cannot start talking about babies until you have spent some time, like a minute at least, acknowledging how horrible rape is. We used to live in a time. Some of you here who are older, I just turned 40, okay, so I'm not even that young. But like some of you remember a time when people just assumed decent things about each other. And you wouldn't have to actually make a point about rape being bad because everyone would be like, well, duh, like it's the most obvious thing. And yet now, we live in a time where we can't even talk about masks without people losing friends. So it's like, as a pro-life guy, especially as a guy, I need to help this person understand the genuine compassion that I have for survivors of rape. And we want to call them survivors of rape. They don't want to be called victims. They don't think of themselves as victims a lot of times. They're survivors. And so what I'm going to do, like if someone brings up the case of rape, I'm going to spend some time just talking. I'm just going to say, like, I think rape's one of the worst things that I know about. It's one of the worst things that a human can do to another human. And having read, the impact statements recently from that trial, the one that Ashton Kutcher got all famous for writing that letter, like those are hard impact statements to read and really, I think, do an amazing job of trying to help people who have not been raped to understand just how evil and horrible this is. And if our society has problems, because I still go to conferences and hear people say, well, if she hadn't worn that dress, if she hadn't had that drink, if she hadn't been in that part of town, like whatever. It's like can we just blame the rapist? Like, just a little bit. Like, and so a legal system, our society has problems, our legal system has problems. There's still an insane amount of untested rape kits in police stations that have been on shelves for years and years and years. And now police stations are having this moral debate of, do they even let the women know that their rape kit never got tested? This invasive procedure that they did to try to catch this guy that they didn't have enough resources for, and so it's now old and stale and you're probably not going to get anything out of it. Do they tell the women, or do they just let them assume they have anything? Like that's what police stations are trying to figure out. It's crazy. And then if she gets pregnant, he's committed multiple moral crimes. He forced himself on her sexually and he forced her to become a mom. And now she's going to make one of the most difficult decisions of her life, of either carrying to term, so 9 months pregnancy, a painful delivery, and then either keeping the child, which is a very expensive 18-year commitment, I don't think people should be forced into. She might offer her child for adoption to a loving couple. I think it's a really selfless thing that people do, but it's really emotionally painful for a lot of birth moms to go through that. Or she's going to make the wrong decision and hire a doctor to kill this baby. Part of the reason why I'm against rape is because it's an act of violence against an innocent person, the woman. The reason that I'm against abortion is because it's an act of violence against another innocent person, the baby. Let me say that again. We have not yet found a better soundbite for helping people understand where we're coming from than this. Part of the reason why I'm against rape is because it's an act of violence against an innocent person. The reason that I'm against abortion is it's an act of violence against another innocent person. Or alternatively, you could say, I don't think to solve that problem, we ought to commit another act of violence on a different innocent person, the baby. And sometimes that's enough. A lot of times that's been sufficient for this person to understand, okay, he actually does care about women. And we are not training anyone to fake compassion. Like we usually tell our youth audience, like if you don't actually feel compassion for survivors of rape, then please don't tell people you're pro-life. Go talk to your pastor or a priest. You've got some soul work to do, right? But like we're trying to do a better job showing the genuine compassion that we have to them so they are able to receive it, so they're able to see that. If they need me to go further, I'll tell you one level deeper that I'll go. Sometimes a thought experiment can help. So ours in Atlanta, Georgia, I did a debate with this group called Georgians for Choice. It was like a network of like a Planned Parenthood, abortion clinics, NARAL, things like that, like all big network. And so I was going to debate this person. I didn't know the background of it. There was this, like at this college in like the urban kind of downtown part of Atlanta. But when I got there with my wife, I showed up to this, big room with like 300 people, just like, all the seats filled. And they were 300 excitedly pro-choice women. Because you see, last weekend they had just had a pro-choice conference. And they loved it, apparently. And they thought it was just so great. Let's extend this to next weekend. Let's find some pro-life sucker and we'll get him here. And we'll do a debate. It's going to be awesome. So they called me. And I was a sucker. And I was like, oh, I'll do a debate. And I show up and I'm the only dude in this room. It's like, oh man, my wife's one of the only pro-life people here. And so that debate, it was a long day. It was a long evening, not my best day. But we basically both did introductory speeches and there's Q&A the rest of the time. It was a terrible debate format. But as you can imagine, rape came up a lot. And I tried different things. But eventually, I responded in a way where I saw a few light bulbs come on. I said, imagine a woman who's been raped and becomes pregnant. And like many women in that situation, she does not have an abortion. She decides not to have an abortion. She carries to term. She ends up deciding to keep her child as a son. And things are going as well as they can be. They're not easy, but she's in therapy. She's begun the long road of healing. His butt's in jail where it belongs. And things are going okay. Until her son turns 1 year old. And then, at different stages, as all kids do, they go from looking like some cute baby, a generic cute baby, to like a little boy or girl. And unfortunately, he got his looks from his biological dad. And now every time she sees him, she sees the rapist. She's having nightmares every night as a result of this. In fact, it's making her a little crazy. She's getting to the point where she actually hates her son, to the point that she wants to kill her son. And I said, do you think that she should be allowed to kill her son? And the entire audience collectively went like this. Sorry. It wasn't that kind of day. I've had those days, but no, it wasn't that day. They were like, no, we can't do that. And I was like, why not? And it wasn't even my debate partner, Becky. It was someone from the audience said, well, that's different. And I said, why is that different? They said, well, you can't kill humans. Right. And earlier today, I made a scientific and philosophical argument for why they are persons, and no one's responded to it. And if I'm right, it's a big if, but if I'm right about that case, then we've got to do something better than just killing people to make others feel better. Like, I want her to feel better, okay? As a recovering codependent, I will do just about anything for her. Does she need a place to stay? Let's find her a place to stay. Does she need diapers and pregnancy care center stuff and counseling and all the things? Like, let's get her all the things. I will do anything for her except kill someone. I am not willing to kill someone to make her feel better, but I'll do just about anything else. Like, I think we should be the church as Jesus intended it. Like, let's bring her in. Let's bring her in and share resources with her and celebrate life with her. That's what this could look like. I want to spend some time talking about life with the mother cases, though. And this is going to get more philosophical. This is going to get a little bit more heady. I'm trying to figure out like how to explain these issues without it being heady, and I'm still working on it. So just try to follow with me if you can. But we're going to get into the weeds because this conversation has really changed as a result of Roe v. Wade being overturned. And I think right now, probably the biggest problem in the pro-life movement is the way that most pro-life people talk about this issue. It wasn't a big deal before Roe was overturned, because then it was all academic. No one really thought Roe was ever going to be overturned, especially not as soon as it did. Like, no one thought that was going to happen until like the Dobbs oral arguments, like 8 months before. It's like, oh, I think that's going to happen. And so, as a result of where states are now have the option for the first time to greatly restrict abortion, they're having to figure out, okay, well, what are the exceptions that we're going to carve? And life of the mother exceptions have been a sticking point because of the way that pro-life people talk about this. So let me define a couple of terms. One would be elective versus inelective abortion. Elective versus inelective abortion. I know some of you, this is going to be total review for, and hopefully some of you it's not. An elective abortion is most of the abortions, about 95% of the abortions. Anytime a woman has an abortion for socioeconomic reasons. She's in college, she's got a career she's worried about, even if she was raped, those are elective abortions. She's choosing to have those. An inelective abortion would be where she's making this choice. She might actually want this baby, but there is some kind of a health issue, significant health issue with her and or the baby. Her life may or may not be at risk. That's an inelective abortion situation. And then ectopic pregnancies. I know most of you know about this, so just in case there's one. There's a few young people in here. An ectopic pregnancy is any time an embryo implants anywhere other than it's supposed to in the uterus. Anywhere else, it's the wrong place. 95% of the time, they'll implant in one of the fallopian tubes. So tubal pregnancies is what we would just refer to as that kind of big category that pro-lifers are usually talking about. Technically, a baby can implant other places. They can implant by the ovaries. They can implant on the outside of the mom's uterus. A few have even survived implanting in women's guts. Because women's bodies are amazing, and they can adapt, and sometimes will find ways to get sustenance to this child while it's around her guts. There's a few babies that have survived that. But tubal pregnancies, babies unfortunately don't survive that because what's supposed to happen is they're supposed to get fertilized around the ovary or around that part of the tube. And then for the first 7 to 10 days of life, it's supposed to go down its first water slide ride. That's what's supposed to happen. In fact, you want one of my favorite intelligent design kind of facts? You want something to get your congregation to want to worship God in the beginning of worship on Sunday? Tell them about this. Inside fallopian tubes are thousands of tiny little hairs called cilia. I see the blank faces. Why should I care about women's hairy fallopian tubes? I'll tell you why. Because they all work in coordination. They do the wave. They all do the wave. It's amazing. And their job is to gently roll this incredibly fragile embryo or blastocyst down from point A to point B. Then when it gets to the uterus, by the way, here's one more. This one's for free. When it gets to the uterus, it will bump up against a part of the uterus to potentially implant. Now, not all places in the uterus are equally optimal to implant. And so if it's not a very good spot and there's time, the mom's body will send back a chemical signal to the baby, pointing it to a better spot. This is oversimplified, but basically it taps up against mom and mom's body says a little lower and to the left. How amazing is that? So mom and baby are doing their first biochemical dance in the first 2 weeks of pregnancy. If that doesn't make you amazed by God, then you're clinically depressed. And you should look into that. It's, and a lot of ministry leaders are, so it's worth looking into that anyway. Okay. Too real? Maybe too real. I don't usually say that. Okay, so all that to say, the most common pro-life mistake that is happening, and it happens everywhere, is insisting that abortion is never medically necessary. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Here's a tweet from one of my colleagues, Lila Rose. He says, despite lies from pro-abortion groups, treatment for ectopic pregnancy and miscarriage are not abortion, medically, morally, or ethically. Even ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, admits that abortion is intervention to end a pregnancy so that it does not result in a live birth. Abortion is designed to kill. This is like the typical way for pro-lifers to talk about this. I want to point out a few issues though. First, notice how she lumps two things together. A medical treatment to resolve a tubal pregnancy with surgical treatment following a miscarriage. These are two very different things. So sometimes when a woman goes through a miscarriage, her body doesn't deliver the baby. My former pro-life boss, his wife, tragically, when she was going through her first of 3 miscarriages, the baby didn't all come out, and they had to go in and do what's called a D&C. It's literally an abortion procedure that's usually intended to kill a living baby and bring it out. In this case, it is just meant to help mom because you see now literally has a decaying corpse inside of her body. It's a big problem, right? And so we call that a D&C. So Lila's comparing that with resolving a tubal pregnancy where typically the baby's still alive. If it wasn't, this wouldn't be a controversial thing at all, right? It would just be like, it would be whatever. So that's a problem. In a tubal pregnancy, the baby is usually alive. And a surgery to remove a dead corpse is by its very nature a different procedure because it's only done after the baby is already dead. So pro-life people who say things like, I'm a 100%, no compromises, no exceptions pro-lifer, I think that they seem to be more driven by the desire to avoid complicity in abortion, to say that it's never acceptable, I'm 100%, than any reasonable engagement with medical facts. Here's a bigger problem. This tweet is literally false on its face. So consider a salpingectomy. There's multiple medical procedures that you can do to try to resolve a tubal pregnancy. The one least controversial, the one that the entire Catholic Church is behind, because a double effect reasoning is called a salpingectomy, where you take either that entire fallopian tube out, or at least you remove a section of it and the baby's in the middle, and you put it on a medical pan. The baby dies almost immediately, and they sew mom back up and hopefully, she's okay. Because that is the least direct way that we can affect this baby under double effect reasoning, like this is, most pro-lifers are totally fine with that. The other procedures are a bit more controversial because they are more direct in the way that they interact with the baby. But salpingectomies are not a controversial thing in the pro-life movement. Yet, the ACOG definition cited, intervention to end a pregnancy so that it does not result in a live birth, would absolutely include salpingectomies to treat an ectopic pregnancy as an abortion because it's an intervention which ends the pregnancy in such a way that does not result in a live birth. Well, someone could retort with, it's obviously true, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still, ectopic pregnancies aren't going to result in a live birth anyway. So who cares? It's like, yeah, but it's still the surgery that does the thing. It's the surgery that ends the pregnancy and results in the death of the embryo. That is an abortion under ACOG's definition. And trying to claim otherwise makes the pro-life movement appear anti-science, while we ignore medical definitions that don't fit our desired narrative. Consider the Dublin Declaration. So about 5 years ago, a tragedy happened in Ireland, which up until then, abortion was completely illegal, except life of the mother cases. And a woman named Savita Halapanavar had a dangerous pregnancy. She ultimately died of sepsis. From the research that I have done and some colleagues in Ireland, they say she died of medical malpractice. Her case would have fallen under the life of the mother exception that was already there in Ireland, but maybe due to miscommunication with the doctors and or the hospital, it took too long and she died. And pro-choice people use that as kind of one of the big ways to kind of convince people like we need abortion to be illegal like all the other European countries because women are dying as a result. Now there were a few other things culturally going on that led to Ireland legalizing abortion, but this was part of it. So in response to Savita's story, 1,000 pro-life medical professionals and researchers signed this statement, which says, as experienced practitioners and researchers in obstetrics and gynecology, we affirm that direct abortion, the purposeful destruction of the unborn child, is not medically necessary to save the life of a woman. We uphold that there is a fundamental difference between abortion and necessary medical treatments that are carried out to save the life of the mother, even if such treatment results in the loss of life of her unborn child. We confirm that the prohibition of abortion does not affect in any way the availability of optimal care to pregnant women. So that language, direct abortion, and purposeful destruction are immediate signals that double effect reasoning is being used here. And note that direct abortion is defined according to the first category as an intentional, purposeful bad action, which naturally raises a question. What is direct abortion here being contrasted with? What is the other thing? The implication is that the ethical procedure that terminates a pregnancy to save the mother's life must be an indirect abortion. Right? You got a direct abortion and an indirect abortion. Now, worth noting, an indirect abortion is still an abortion, but the distinction between direct and indirect abortions is morally significant, certainly isn't universally accepted, but it's at least tenable based on accepting some philosophical premises. What is not tenable is the ad hoc move made in the following two paragraphs to merge direct abortion and abortion into the same concept, moving the implicit idea of indirect abortion outside the realm of abortion entirely. Necessary medical treatments are contrasted as fundamentally different from abortions, which is half true. Abortions to save the life of the mother are necessary medical treatments that are certainly fundamentally different from elective abortions, but they can't be fundamentally different from all abortions because they are a member of the set of objects which includes all abortions, direct or indirect. So to spell that out a bit, a workable version of the Dublin Declaration's second paragraph would say something like this. We uphold that there is a fundamental difference between elective abortion and necessary medical treatments that are carried out to save the life of the mother, even if such treatment results in the loss of life of her unborn child. Usually, all we have to do is add the word elective, if we want to be clear. That's all we've got to do. Unfortunately, and this brings us to the reason why this topic is so crucial right now, their last paragraph expands upon their mistake in a dangerous direction. The signatories maintain that abortion bans don't affect the availability of optimal care to pregnant women, which can only be true if one of two things is true. Either all abortion bans contain crystal clear life of the mother exceptions, or B, if no abortion is ever medically necessary to provide optimal care. Well, we know that one's not true. But see, unfortunately, the Dublin Declaration also undercuts A. Because after all, if I'm a pro-life legislator and I have 1,000 doctors telling me that abortion is literally never medically necessary, why would I include a crystal clear exception for the life of the mother? I wouldn't need to. And an abortion ban. And then doctors would be left, understandably, believing that they can't perform a self-injectomy. Since it's medically coded as an abortion. And the letter of the law would be saying that all abortions are banned, with no exceptions for the life of the mother. That's one of the biggest reasons that we need to define abortion properly in cases of medical necessity. Pro-life states might write laws without clear life of the mother exceptions because they don't think it's an abortion when it's done to save a life, even though the pro-life legislators would support the life-saving interventions that doctors are now left thinking they can't legally perform. Here's the second biggest reason. When pro-lifers define life of the mother cases as not abortions and then ban the rest of the abortions, it works in their heads and leaves them emotionally satisfied that they're not supporting any abortions. They can call themselves no exceptions pro-lifers. But no one else thinks about abortion this way. And no one else talks about abortion this way. Pro-choice people, uncommitted moderates, even many pro-life people understand that an action, direct or indirect, that brings about the end of a pregnancy in such a way that the baby doesn't survive is an abortion. If we care about creating clear abortion laws, which we do, then they need to be clear to doctors as well. So we ought to know the definitions in their heads. And it's important to use a definition that is intelligible to other people to keep us from scoring PR points against ourselves. Which brings me to a video that went viral on Reddit multiple times in the last year for all the wrong reasons.
Do you think a 10-year-old would choose to carry?
In the 10-year-old case, first of all, the Ohio...
My question is, would a 10-year-old choose to carry a baby?
In the Ohio case, the Ohio Attorney General said that abortion would have been justified.
Focus on the question, please. Would a 10-year-old choose to carry a baby?
I cannot...
Do you think a 10-year-old should choose to carry a baby?
I believe it would probably impact her life, and so therefore it would fall under any exception and would not be an abortion.
Wait. It would not be an abortion if a 10-year-old with her parents made the decision not to have a baby that was a result of a rape?
If a 10-year-old became pregnant as a result of rape and it was threatening her life, then that's not an abortion. So it would not fall under any abortion restriction in our nation.
Ms. Warbelow, are you familiar with disinformation?
Yes, I am.
Did you just hear some disinformation?
Yes, I heard some very significant disinformation.
Why don't you tell me about that?
Yes, an abortion is a procedure. It's a medical procedure that individuals undergo for a wide range of circumstances, including because they have been sexually assaulted, raped in the case of the 10-year-old. It doesn't matter whether or not there is a statutory exemption. It is still a medical procedure that is understood to be an abortion.
So people jumped on that video because it appeared to show a leader of one of the largest, most impactful pro-life organizations not understanding what abortion is in public in a congressional hearing. And so then all these people are like, I guess you shouldn't be fighting abortion if you don't even know what it is. Now, does Catherine Glenn Foster not know what abortion is? No, of course she knows what abortion is. But she was using the definition that most pro-lifers want to use, and you can see exactly what happens. As soon as we start talking to people outside of our sphere, it doesn't make sense anymore. It's equivocation. It's literally where two sides or two people are using the same word, but they define them differently. So we just miss each other. We miss each other all the time doing things like that. You know what an unforced error is in sports, like tennis? This is where you lose a point, not because your opponent did anything good, because you screwed up. You served it twice into the net. That would be an unforced error. This was a major unforced error. Memorize this one. If a woman's life is at risk, then I absolutely think that she has the right to take medical action to save her own life. You want to say this to a pro-choice person as early in the conversation as you can. Bring it up yourself. Because they are being told by pro-choice OBGYNs on TikTok that are getting millions and millions of views who are talking about the pro-lifers that are passing laws that are going to kill all these women. And sometimes, and I'm a very charitable guy, but sometimes I know that they are knowingly lying for political reasons. There's one OBGYN that listed, here's 25 different situations where a woman could die from this legislation. So I had a colleague. I didn't tell a colleague, but I have a colleague who looked into that, and only one of them was actually a life-threatening pregnancy situation. All the others were there could be serious issues, but not life-threatening issues. So you want to say that. And then you want to talk about triage. So triage is when we're trying to save as many people as we can. We train like medical soldiers to go onto the battlefield after the battle. We don't train them to just like a rabbit, just like find the first person you're physically closest to and just work on him. And then what's the next person? Okay, right here. No. We train them to make decisions. We train them to make really hard life and death decisions because there are multiple categories represented here. There's at least 3. You've got people who are going to die no matter what you do. These are the guys in Saving Private Ryan who are missing a lot of things. And it's like you can give them morphine maybe to try to reduce their suffering, but there is no saving that person. Then there's going to be a category on the other end of the spectrum of people who are going to be fine. Maybe they're immobilized. Maybe they broke their leg running down a hill, but like they're hurting, and they're going to need treatment before they get moved out of the field, but they're fine. You're going to have other people who won't die if they get care, but they will die if they don't get care quickly. And we train the guys to go straight to those. They're not killing anyone if, as a result of that, other people behind them are dying. They're just doing their best. This is triage. And when a mother tragically has a situation where her baby gets stuck in the wrong place, it's triage. There are not hardly any cases, any life-threatening pregnancy situations where we can save the baby and not the woman. Pretty much we can almost always save the woman. It's a question of whether or not we can save the baby. And sometimes we can't. We cannot move a baby who's implanted in a fallopian tube from point A to point B. I wish we could. There's a few people who've kind of pretended like they have, but I've looked into it. I don't buy it at all. I wish we had the technology to Star Trek beam the baby from point A to point B or to an artificial womb or something like that. We don't have that right now. So it's just tragic. I was in a hospital ER one time waiting with one of the board members of our pro-life Teams for Life group, waiting in the ER because his wife was having surgery for a 5th ectopic pregnancy. And it was tragic, and we're crying, but like they're pro-life, like there was nothing wrong happening there. It was just something tragic happening there. Third, life of the mother exceptions and why you're in favor of clearly written exceptions in the laws. Just say that. Just say, I am all for clear exceptions in the laws. I don't want doctors to be confused. It should be crystal clear exactly what procedures doctors can and can't do so that they know what they're allowed to do and what could actually get them sent to jail. It shouldn't be vague. And then finally, it's like self-defense. So unless you're a pacifist who believes that all violence is immoral, probably most of us in this room agree that if you get home today and there's a gunman with a gun at one of your family members, you can take legal action to take him out. There's nothing immoral with that. It's like the most clear case where it's morally right to kill someone. That doesn't mean you get to just murder people generally, like walking down the street. That's not what that means. I've had, for instance, people on campuses be like, what do you think of her life's at risk? I'm like, she should totally be able to deal with that. Like if she can take medical action, if it's whatever, I don't care what you call it. You can call it an abortion or something else, but her life's at risk. It's the morality of it. It's I don't care what we label it. And they'll be like, so I just proved that abortion is right. Because in the end, that's like they think they've got me. And I'm like, you so don't. Like, it's harder than that. It's prima facie wrong. If you want to get all Latin, it's prima facie wrong to kill humans, but there's going to be weird cases. Just war would be like another common case. But this is like self-defense. It doesn't mean that it's generally right to have abortions, but in a tragic situation like this, we save as many as we can. Okay, I'm going to completely switch gears now. I want to share an idea with you, and then I'm going to jumpstart a kind of a Q&A/brainstorm session with you guys. My attitude towards pastors has evolved in the 20 years I've been doing pro-life work. I started, like many pro-life people, and maybe some pro-life people that you've dealt with in your churches, being pretty frustrated with pastors who never talked about abortion. I felt like they must be either like ignorant, maybe they haven't been told enough about it, or maybe more likely they're afraid. They're afraid of the results of talking about it, of looking like a political pastor, or having, maybe, wealthy people on the other side walk away. And those are real issues. I'm not acting like money is not, like I'm in a nonprofit too. Like losing a major donor is a big thing. Like I get that. And then I talked to a few more priests and pastors who helped me understand that there was another category, a much more understandable category of why some don't talk about abortion a lot, and it's this. I think every pastor and priest knows two things. He knows that there are post-abortive people in his congregation, and he also knows that he does not know who they all are. So there's like these ghosts in your congregation who are hurting, who are probably still feeling shame unless they've gone through a forgiveness and set free kind of a program here. But you don't know who they are. So then it's like, well, how can I talk about this in a way that's not going to maybe send some invisible people to me down a shame spiral? Maybe the best thing would be to not talk about it because I can't be there to actually shepherd them one-on-one. That makes a lot of sense to me. I would be struggling with that if I was a pastor. Never going to be a pastor. You guys are heroes, but that's not what I'm going to do. But my friend David B. Wright told me about a pastor's luncheon that he was at. It probably was kind of a lot like this. And a woman from that town bravely shared her story, even though her pastor was actually in the room. So she basically said that she had been sitting in the same spot in the same pew for like 30 years. And she said, my pastor will talk about everything. He'll talk about human trafficking. He'll talk about child pornography, like all these really, really horrible things. But he's never said the A word. And she said, and the way that made me feel was that since I've had an abortion, he's willing to talk about sex trafficking, but he won't talk. So abortion must be the only unforgivable sin. Do you see how that connection can be made? How her pastor meant well. But sometimes while we do things that we mean well, we have unintended bad effects happen. And it would make sense to me that he wouldn't have predicted that, but that is what happened to her. As Karen has pointed out, I'm glad that you guys already brought up the study because I was going to bring it up too. 36% of women having abortions in that study were attending church at least once a month when she had her abortion. Because a lot of times we're like, okay, the Christian abortion statutes must be like the Christmas and Easter, cultural Catholic types, right? Like it's like just more of like a family thing than anything else. No, 36% were going to church that month that she had the abortion. So that raises a question. Why are so many Christian women having abortions? Because there's a certain sense, I think, where it's like these are the worst abortions. These are women who know. They know about the Imago Dei. They know that this is a baby made in God's image, as opposed to a lot of atheists who would just think that this is like some clump of cells. And yet they abort. Why? Well, there's always going to be many reasons why someone chooses abortion, but I think for Christian women, there's an added factor that happens primarily in Christian circles, which is a concern about the greater social consequences that will happen as a woman who's pregnant out of wedlock. See, it doesn't matter so much to like there's stigma about pregnancy on college campuses, but it's not the kind of stigma in churches. Like it's more like maybe you did a dumb thing, or maybe you weren't using birth control enough, or something like that. But like it's not like for us. It's a really different thing. I've interviewed two women who have very similar stories from a long time ago of being taken to the front of church on Sunday morning to apologize to the entire congregation for having premarital sex. In both cases, her boyfriend was in the pew and no one said anything to him. So sometimes there's like this patriarchal thing going on too. I don't think hardly any churches in 2023 would do that. But a lot of people have heard these stories. And a lot of people have really no idea how your church would handle an unwed pregnancy. Because we handle it in private, right? Like just like naturally. Like we're not just gonna, just gonna be like, hey everyone, here's this thing. So there's an epistemological problem here. I think your churches would handle this great. The question is, do the women in your church who will become pregnant later out of wedlock know that your church is one of the safe places for that to happen? I think many churches would rise to the challenge and would do a great job of supporting this woman, but she doesn't know that if she hasn't seen it dealt with publicly before. And even though some churches would respond to an unplanned pregnancy well, she doesn't know that, and so out of fear, these women abort, and they become part of that 36% statistic. So, these women need to understand that it is not a sin in and of itself to be in the state of pregnancy. It might be a sin how she got there, but it is not a sin. It is not a scarlet letter P for having a child growing inside of her body. So I think pastors need to become more proactive and less reactive in this area. This is like the one downside of this idea. You can't just delegate it off to like the pro-life leader in your church or just the youth pastor, although your youth pastor should totally be doing this too. I think this really has to come from the top down. Like I sometimes do the thing where like, the church will graciously, let me, speak from the pulpit on Sunday morning. And even if a church offered me the chance, like, hey, toward the end of your talk, go ahead and walk us through this, we're going to communicate to the church that we're going to be good on this. I wouldn't do it. It needs to come from their shepherd. There's a lot of different ways that it can be done, but ultimately, what I want to see every pastor and youth pastor in the country do is to make a public commitment on behalf of the whole church that they will treat women who become pregnant with grace and compassion instead of fear and rejection, instead of shame and rejection. I'm not even asking you to do pro-life sermons. Like you can, but this could be a 5-minute announcement twice a year. It's got to become part of the culture of your church. It's got to be a thing repeated enough that everyone knows. Like it goes out in an email, every once in a while. And the youth pastor probably talks about it, maybe even quarterly or something like that. But regardless of how often, I think this is what pastors should make clear to the church. And you can word this however you want, although I will happily give this to you if you just want a script. And I've got a longer version too if you want. Here's what we believe. It is not sinful in and of itself to be in the state of pregnancy. The actions that led to becoming pregnant may have been sinful, but there is nothing intrinsically wrong with being a mother, with having a child growing inside your body. We love babies here, and we hate it when babies are killed. Here's what we won't do. We will not encourage anybody to have an abortion because we believe that every unborn child is a bearer of God's image. We will not kick a woman out of the church for being pregnant. We will not shame her. We will not let people tease her. Here's what we will do. We will celebrate the life in her womb and connect her with a local pregnancy center. We will do our best to love unwed mothers well, the way Jesus loved the woman at the well and the woman caught in adultery. We will approach her with grace and friendship. We will teach her students and this young woman how to deal with shame through forgiveness. We will throw a baby shower for her, perhaps through a small group, and celebrate the baby's birth just like we do all births in our church. I want to tell you the most common counter-argument I get from pastors ever since I started talking about this about 5 years ago. But Josh, we shouldn't condone sin. And if I do this, this looks too much like condoning sin. I am not saying that we should publicly approve of the way that she got pregnant. I'm saying that we should publicly celebrate the life in her womb and that her sin issues should be addressed in private in the context of relationship, in whatever way is appropriate in your denomination. This mirrors Jesus' statement to the woman caught in adultery. Has no one condemned you? Neither do I condemn you. Go and from now on, what? Sin no more. A lot of doing this with pastors. Galatians 6:1 says, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in what? Spirit of gentleness. In a spirit of gentleness. I think a lot of really bad things have happened in church history in spite of good intentions. I think a lot of pastors have tried to do a good thing, upholding a sexual ethic and not condoning sin, and I think that has often had an unintended bad effect. The forming of a culture in the church where unwed pregnancy appears to be a taboo subject. one that should be dealt with outside of the church, not lovingly responded to inside the church. And I want to say that you can do both. You can uphold a sexual ethic and avoid condoning sin, and you can celebrate unborn life at the same time, which will literally save lives in the process. I was the worship leader at a church plant for 6 years in California before we moved to Charlotte. And my pastor, Matt Troop, he's still the pastor there, he is maybe the most pro-life pastor I've ever met. He does do the full, every January he's doing a different pro-life sermon. He's like coming to me for like ideas because he's done a lot of them now. He had me do a few of them while I was there. He had an international pro-life speaker in the church congregation, so I did a couple. But to his credit, he still did most of them because he wanted to make sure that the body, and this was a small, we're talking about 60 to 80 people. He wanted to know that it was their pastors coming from their shepherd. They wasn't just delegating this to the pro-life speaker guy. So after I had this idea, which was after I'd already moved here, I sent him this idea and he kind of made this the ending of his next sermon. And that afternoon, he got this text message. In all my 66 years, I've never heard a sermon that said, in light of what Jesus has done for us, this is how we are going to talk and act should an unwed pregnant woman show up in our body. I can't wait for your sermon to share it with friends who have suffered quite different reactions from their church bodies. I shared this idea with a friend of mine named Shannon who works at the Fresno Pregnancy Care Center, an amazing pregnancy care center. And I was sharing with her about this idea. And she told me the story about a friend of hers that I'll call Anna, who had been working in like the administrative part of a church, and she ended up with a false positive pregnancy test. So she's not actually pregnant, but she thinks she is, which is what's important. And Shannon said that she was emotionally almost instantly on her way to Planned Parenthood. And I said, Shannon, imagine an alternative universe. This is like a philosophy thing, we do this all the time. Imagine an alternative universe. Everything's exactly the same except one thing is different. What if her pastor's been doing this for the last 2 years? What if 4 times in the last 2 years he's basically walked through this idea? Would she still be immediately going to have the abortion? She said, no, I think that would have been enough for her not to want to have an abortion. I think this can save lives. And I really want you to do it. And we're asking people to pledge to do it. In fact, if you go to equalityinstitute.com/pastor, you will find a pledge form. Because eventually we're going to make a map, one of those maps with little pins. And then if someone moved to Aiken and want to know what is it, one of our fans moved to Aiken and want to know what is a safe church here, they could find you. We don't have this set up yet. This is a down the road thing. But I would ask you, if you're going to do it, let us know. It would be really encouraging for us, for our donors. There's over 100 churches doing it now. Okay. Here is where I wanted to get us brainstorming. This is going to be much more informal. When Roe versus Wade was overturned, a few minutes after we published a video that we had pre-recorded. In it, I talked about the 3 next steps for the pro-life movement. Here's what I said about step 1. The first task is to continue supporting women and families in difficult situations, especially when they are considering abortion as a response to a pregnancy in challenging circumstances. Much of this work is already being done by pro-life people all across the country. Hundreds of pregnancy centers are right now providing vital assistance to women whose circumstances might lead them to consider abortion, both during pregnancy and after the birth of their children. Pregnancy centers will continue to provide these services as they face the challenge of continuing to scale when even more families need their help. I said that because there is a need gap. Especially in the states where abortion bans have been introduced or significant abortion restrictions, there are women now that up until recently had abortion as a resource and now don't. There is a need gap. Now, it would be great if some of that need gap is being filled through charities, through pregnancy centers. That's awesome. I also think part of the need gap ought to be filled by the church. Now, I've been a part of multiple church plants, and I suspect every church planting pastor has probably said something like this to the core group, the group of guys that started. We're going to be in the neighborhoods, guys. We're going to get out of those 4 walls. We're going to get out there. We're going to be the hands, feet, and blood of Christ. We're going to be out there. We're going to serve the neighborhood in all these really practical ways. And then church starts. And that's really hard. Like, it's just like I've been on worship teams since I was 11. Like, I see how the sausage gets made. And there's a lot involved in just making what we do happen on Sunday mornings. And so it's really understandable that sometimes outreach ends up not being as significant as what we want it to be. But this is an opportunity that we have a window to show people that the pro-life movement actually does not have fetus tunnel vision. We have a window to show people that we really care about women, and we will provide for them with actual resources. The question is, what will that look like? What does it look like, practically, for a church who doesn't really have an outreach program in their neighborhood to start one? That is going to be my main question for you. Now, I'll tell you an answer I've heard that I haven't spent enough time researching yet, but I'm excited about it. Have you heard of these things called micro-churches? There's one in Alabama, there's one in Pennsylvania, New York area, somewhere over there. And basically, these two churches have started these little micro-churches with a family or two living in an apartment complex. The least churched places that exist right now, like 90% non-church rate in apartment buildings. And what's cool about it, though, and what's kind of different than the way this has been done in the past sometimes, is the goal of the families who are living there is not to get them back to our church. And they can get in the program and start tithing and all that. That's not their goal. The goal is just to love on these people, helping the people who are right around us, who would never walk into our church buildings, our front doors, but that we could still help and show them Jesus.